Greetings of peace, beloved, wherever you may be. I am currently in Kuala Lumpur looking out my hotel window at a beautiful blue sky. It's been very nice and warm in the 90s, and as always in Southeast Asia, very high humidity. So, enjoying my very air-conditioned hotel room at the moment. But I've been in Southeast Asia for just over a week now. I spent 5 days in Singapore, some really good programs. For the last few months, I've been doing events for my new book of poetry, Empty in the Ocean. I did a month in Europe and then 3 months bouncing around North America. And then now I'm here in Southeast Asia for the foreseeable future, at least a month. And Singapore was amazing. We started off there. And now I'm in Malaysia, gearing up for a bunch of programs. We've done a few. And it's been great. I love this region. I love the people. Nusantara, this whole region was traditionally called Nusantara. And been learning a lot about the history of the Wali Sangho, the 9 saints that brought the path of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah to this region. And it's just a special place, as everybody who's been here or who is from here knows. So shout out to everybody wherever you may be. This podcast that I'm introducing is a unique one. So there's a podcast called Diffused Congruence that I've listened to over the years. In fact, I made a joke that they were doing a podcast before I even knew what a podcast was. They're almost on their 50th month in a row doing this, so they've been doing it for years. And it's a couple brother, Parvez and Zaki, who I've known Parvez for years. And they have really good guests, amazing guests, from scholars to comedians to many friends of mine. I mean, from Osama Cannon, Mustafa Davis, Mark Gonzalez, I believe they had on there. And then they also have teachers that have had Dr. Omar, they have had Sherman Jackson, professors like Dr. Jonathan Brown. They had comedian Azhar Usman a couple times. I like both those episodes. Anyway, I listen to their podcasts on a regular basis. And so they asked me, we've talked actually for over a year about doing a podcast together. So luckily when I was just in the Bay Area, what was it? I guess over a week ago now, a couple weeks ago. And we are having an event for Daniel Abdul Hai Moore, who is one of my mentors, poetic mentors, a great, amazing Sufi beat poet from Oakland, California. We were having the first urs, or celebration of his life. It's been about a year since he passed on. His wife was there and many of his old friends and companions. He had an amazing journey. If you're interested in his poetry and his work, check out his website, ecstaticexchange.com. He has just a lot of poetry videos and information there. Some of his writings, too. He was a playwright. And he just, even like his biography, like he lived a really interesting life. Allah yarhamahu. God have mercy on his soul. So anyway, I was in the Bay Area to do an event honoring him, and then I came to Southeast Asia after that. But anyway, that day of the event, we did this podcast. So it was about probably less than 2 weeks ago that we recorded this. Anyway, we agreed to release it on both of our platforms. So they've released it on Diffused Congruence, and I'm releasing it on Path and Present. In this podcast, I talk about kind of my life, and then we reflect on religion and spirituality and meaning and culture. And I think it was a good conversation. I enjoyed it, and I hope you will. So check it out. and check out their podcast, Diffused Congruence. If you like the conversation, trust me, they have a wide range of really interesting people on every month. So I think you'll dig it, and go support them. And keep supporting Path and Present. It's a beautiful thing. We're enjoying doing it, and trying to keep it consistent in our travels. Just support by spreading the word of mouth. It's great to see it grow. It's great to see when I travel and people say, "Oh, I love your podcast." That's the main way. Just word of mouth. Keep supporting it, and you can support on Patreon if you have the means financially to support. Help us break even with this. That'd be great too. Even though we do it for the love, it'd be nice to break even. And thank you to everybody who has been supporting. And last but not least, send us your love and light. Cool. So hopefully I'll be able to do some recordings of conversations with some of the people out here in Southeast Asia. There's a few people that I have in mind. And so make dua that we can make that happen. And take it global. All right, y'all. Sending love and light. Peace.
Welcome to Diffused Congruence. My name is Zaki Hasan, and joining me once again is my co-host Parvez Ahmed.
Hey, welcome back, listeners. Good to have you guys back. We're pretty excited about our guest. We've actually been in talks for quite some time.
The negotiations have been ongoing.
That's right. So, and a little bit of cross-pollination, as we'll see when we read who the guest is, and he'll talk about some of his ventures.
All right, well, and joining us for this episode is Baraka Blue. He's a poet, musician, author, teacher, and MC. He's highly decorated within the global artist community for his original synthesis of hip-hop and spoken word poetry with the tradition of mystical poets such as Rumi and Hafez. He has released multiple studio albums and 2 published collections of poetry. He's founding director of Rumi Center for Spirituality and the Arts. And for his research on Sufi thought, Baraka Blue was awarded a master's degree in Islamic Studies from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. His current research and teaching focuses are Sufi poetry, Sufi psychology, Islam in the West, and Islamic art. As a teaching artist, he's performed and taught all over the world, including at such institutions as Princeton and the School of Oriental and African Studies. Baraka Blue, thank you for joining us on Diffused Congruence.
Thank you for having me.
So, this is, your work precedes you. Mashallah, you've built up quite a reputation for your work in this particular field. So I guess before we even talk about your artistic endeavors, I want to hear about your Islamic endeavors and how those came about.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a great honor. You guys are like the original podcasters. Before I even knew what a podcast was, you guys had a podcast.
Wow.
And so now that I've been diving into the podcast world, I see you guys as you guys are like the Salaf. You guys are the predecessors. So,
would that make you a Salafi then?
I am. Right. And but yeah, 48. You guys are, that's mashallah. So, yeah, my journey into Islam was an interesting one. Amir Suleiman, my friend, he has a Harvard fellowship, and he called it Between Rakim and Rumi. So, very musical city, Jimi Hendrix, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Quincy Jones, all that. But by the time I came on, growing up, it was all hip-hop, right? Urban America was all hip-hop. So, I was very much formed by hip-hop. And the kind of local scene was really beautiful in that it was a lot of consciousness. It was a lot of telling the stories of marginalized peoples who, basically like Freestyle Fellowship had an album called Inner City Griots. And like that's what I think about that kind of like real hip hop. They're inner city griots, and griots or the bards in Europe, you know, traditional societies, the poets or the storytellers, they're the memory, the living memory.
That's right.
And they pass on the tradition, and they, you know, carry on a collective consciousness. Who are we as a people? What are the stories? What do we value? What is worth sharing and worth saving? And so hip hop had that. And so I kind of grew up in that, and it exposed me to, previously enslaved and colonized people and how they preserve their stories and how they preserve their traditions. And that was really formational for me. So that's kind of the Rakim piece of it. And because hip hop, I know you guys know, a lot of people outside of the hip hop community don't necessarily know so much how like central Islam has been as a thread throughout hip hop from the very beginning, as far as like, you know, the 5%ers, especially as this kind of offshoot of the Nation of Islam, and the foundational language and terminology and just worldview of hip hop being formed by that. So, and then of course also Sunni Muslims figuring into that. So that's that piece. But then at the same time, you know, it was like multicultural, urban, very left coast, very left, very like the Bay Area, Seattle is,
of course.
Super leftist politics, counterculture, very, you know, into Eastern spirituality. And looking back now, I see that my parents' generation and the parents of all my friends growing up, very, you know, urban, multicultural, liberal environment, a lot of them had turned east for spirituality. A lot of them had, you know, become Buddhists or traveled the world or went to India seeking a guru, that whole kind of movement. And so it was just as easy to find books by the Dalai Lama or Rumi in the houses that I was growing up in as it is to find the Bible. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so that's where Rumi comes in. So, you know, I was exposed to about the same time as I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, which I read because all my heroes, the rappers, he was their hero.
That's right.
So I want to know who he was. At the same time, you know, my best friend's father, who was like an old school beat poet, and he was like, "That's cool, you guys are into hip hop and you're making that," but he was like, "Let me expose you to some of this." So he turned us on to Rumi and stuff like that, because he was really into Rumi, and he was in, you know, jazz and all that whole thing. So I didn't even understand it at the time, but there's these two kind of currents, right? That the kind of like that black Muslim current, and then the kind of more like white turning east for spirituality, that counterculture, leftist politics, and Sufism is a big portion of that. I mean, it's more dominant, like that people would, you know, get into like Indian spirituality, yoga and gurus and Vedanta, and then Buddhism obviously was central, but Sufism was a big part of that too. And so that was kind of part of that whole milieu. And so the metaphysical bookstore down the street had a big Sufism section and all that stuff. So I was reading about Sufism, you know, Pir Inayat Khan and stuff like that when I was young and a teenager. And so looking back now, I can say that I was reading about Buddhism, I was interested in all that, but what I liked about Islam is it had the edge of like a Malcolm. It had the social justice emphasis, standing up for the rights of the poor and oppressed and the downtrodden, but it had the deep spiritual universe as well. And I needed something that had a little bit of edge, you know, just from the way that I grew up.
That's right. But
that also I needed something that was spiritually enriching. And so to see the breadth that Islam has, you know, a Malcolm and a Rumi, this is the same tradition. I said, okay, this is for me. You know?
So did you grow up in I mean, I think you maybe already have sort of answered it, but you didn't grow up really connected to a church, say?
No.
Or church attendance?
No,
wasn't
not at
part
all.
Of the family.
The only time I went to church was when I would spend the night on Saturday night at one of my best friend David Folken's house, because his family went to church. So then, you know, for a period there I would go because there was this girl that I liked and she would go to church. So I was like, I'm coming with you. But so now I know, but I didn't know before that my father, he grew up Catholic, my mother grew up Protestant.
Okay.
And so my father went to Catholic school growing up, and he had a really negative experience. The nuns were super harsh and beating the kids, and it was very like dogmatic. Our way is the only way, the true way, right? I know no Islamic schools are like that, right?
Right. Yeah.
But
we can't relate. I don't know what you're talking about.
So that was his experience,
Yeah.
and so he never said anything negative about religion to me. But my mom told me later, when a few years ago, that he actually told her, he said, "I don't want them being exposed to religion. I want them to make their own decision as they grow up." Because my mom's Protestant, upbringing was very loose, like Easter and Christmas, and she had positive. She said, "Oh, look, I want to take them for the holidays," and my dad was like, he was opposed to that, which is interesting. But he never said anything negative about religion or the church to us, which he didn't color it like, "Oh, that's a bunch of," So I'm actually very grateful.
That's right.
Because I think a lot of people carry a lot of baggage from their upbringing. In fact, I was at a retreat with Kabir Helminski recently, and there was a woman who grew up Christian, I think Catholic, and she became Muslim through Sufism. And she said, we were raised like hardcore Catholic, and I had so many bad experiences that I just needed a clean break. And Islam was a tradition that I didn't have all that baggage with.
Right.
I know other people may have had like that upbringing, but I didn't, so I was able to approach it with a clean slate.
Right.
And I thought that was interesting because I basically, when I came of age as like a teenager, I approached religion like a buffet. Like I was like, oh, I like yoga, I like meditation, I like, some of these like indigenous shamanic traditions because I like psychedelics and I like smoking herb, and that's kind of part of that. So I'll weave that in, and I'm really into like ancient Egyptian. That's really cool. So, I was just totally... And that was okay for a while, but there came a point where I realized that it was kind of my nafs choosing what it chose, and so that my nafs wasn't being transformed by it because the nafs resists transformation. So I actually needed something from beyond me to submit to. I realized that when I was 20 years old, and it was because I had made a series of not so spiritual and wise decisions, and I got myself in a little bit of trouble, and so then I was like, whoa, for the first time in my life, I was not only not arrogant, but I was not even proud of who I was. I made some decisions that my kind of ego was shattered for a second there, and it was the most important, I think, experience because I was able to like be sincere and say, okay, because this is the thing. From my reading of different traditions, I came to this position where I was like, there is one source, creator, God, infinite names, the infinitely named one. Right. And there's, across time and space, individuals, the enlightened one, the sages, the saints, the prophets, the avatars, those who realized the full potential of humanity, who drew near to that source. And there's, so I looked at religion kind of like they're all essentially the same, and there's beauty in them. But basically when I was 20 and I came to this point, I was like, okay, I said a prayer, like really like, I don't see a way. I made a few very bad decisions and I don't see a way out of this. Like this is going to alter my life in ways that I really don't want to have happen. And so then I prayed my first like really sincere prayer, like the man on a drowning ship. Like, all right, there's no way I can turn anymore. So now I'm like really just praying. And I was like, I've always believed. I said to Allah, to God, I've always believed in you. I've known that you are true. And I've taken some steps on the right path, and I've also veered left, and I veered right. But if you take this tribulation away from me, I promise I'll devote myself to the straight path. And even if you don't take the tribulation away, I still will, because you can't make contingent prayers. Right. Oh God, if you give me a Ferrari, I'll be righteous. Like, no. Give me the Ferrari, please. But if not, I'll still be righteous, because that's. And so, interestingly enough, thinking back, I was saying the Fatiha in English. Yeah. Like, wow. That's
so right.
And I was, interesting enough, I know the room that I was in, the apartment complex, and I was praying towards Mecca on my knees, even though I didn't know. Wow. And so I was in this I was in a space where I was with a young group of brothers that I grew up with, and we were exposed to all these traditions, different races, classes, backgrounds, reading a lot of leftist material, but also spirituality. We had a whole library. We all kind of lived together in this place. We were like selling music and marijuana to pay the rent. Like, we were kind of like these very rebel against society, and like, there's a lot of good, but we were also intoxicated most of the time. Mm-hmm. And we were having it was just a lot of imbalance. It was good, but it was all mixed in. And so I kind of came to this breaking point where I was like, I need to really dedicate myself to the creator of existence, and basically through that, like, I didn't even know that was Islam at the moment. But a few things came into my life, and I saw that it was,
So, like, it's interesting. I think at the outset you identified those two streams, right? Mm-hmm. You have the hip hop Black Muslim stream of Islam in America, and then this. I think we haven't really delved into it a lot in the show, but probably, like you said, counterculture, leftist, white mysticism, right? Sufi orientation. But maybe if we were to look at, say, the lowest common denominator between the two of them, or identifying trait, is that it's spirituality or motifs or aspects of the religion without doctrine. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, what spoke to me about Rumi, for instance, was his emphasis on the experiential knowledge of God.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think a lot of people that embrace Islam, that's one thing that's drawn to them. There's this emphasis on no intermediary between you and God.
That's right.
You know what I mean? And I think in a certain sense, it's like one time I was in the UK and I was with Sheikh Abdul Hakim Rad. First time I met him. And I said, he asked me how I became Muslim, and I said, well, it's funny, I never thought I'd be part of an organized religion. And he said, well, it's not that organized. And of course it was this dry British humor, but
that's right.
I felt there was two levels to it. Because on the first level, yes, unfortunately we're kind of disorganized, we got some work to do.
Yeah.
But also, when Western people think organized religion and what that means in the history of Europe, it means there's this church authority, this temporal hierarchy saying that we represent the Word of God.
That's right.
And who's in and who's out. And that's what the West rejects ultimately. And that's this whole thing. And Islam wasn't like that.
That's right.
It never was.
Right.
The ulama were never a priestly class.
Mm-hmm.
They, in some manifestations, you could say they became like that in certain ways, but
that's right.
in the true sense of the word, the ulama, or really the knowers, the learned ones, they're just individual seekers that took the path seriously enough to delve into it and to master the tradition and to preserve it. And it became this vast conversation of what is best, what does the divine want, what is the true prophetic inheritance. And there's very few things where there's only one answer.
Right.
There's this vastness. And so
plurality of,
and even locally there were different authorities in different localities, and it was very wide.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that, mashallah, is beautiful about Islam.
Right.
I mean, the people always say, why can't you excommunicate bin Laden, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so that's the negative side, is you can't excommunicate anyone.
Right.
But that's a small, that's the benefit far outweighs that. It's this vast
So
path.
the benefits of a decentralized approach, right, to orthodoxy.
Because my point is, what I really truly believe is temporal power mixed with religion is always a very dangerous thing. And you see it happening all over the Muslim world right now.
Yeah.
Is the way that scholars are being used by different nation states to fulfill their agenda, and it's causing the people in many of these nation states to lose hope in religion and lose hope in scholarship altogether. And you saw the way it played out in the Arab Spring.
Yep.
And there's no way to avoid it, because the draw of the kind of worldly thing is very strong. And power corrupts. And so it needs to be, and the kind of the scholarship, the religious authority, if per se, and the temporal authority split very early in the Islamic tradition.
Certainly.
And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, right. So at like the ulama as being sort of in conscious opposition to the state, as opposed to being part of the state apparatus. Although you certainly did have those elements as well, but by and large, it was in conscious opposition to the state, or to keep the state in check.
Right, or to counsel them.
Yeah, or to counsel them. Right.
That's the other option, but it's never to,
be sort of usurped or, be used by state authority.
And of course, in practice, that we already know the world is the world, but
that's right.
That's the ideal.
Right. So when do you sort of consider then your, like, is there a moment that you would classify as, okay, that's when I took my Shahada?
Yeah, I took my Shahada when I was 20 years old. And
this was when? What year?
2005.
Is that right? Okay.
So like I was my late teens, right? So like I was in high school, 9/11 happened, and then after I graduated, then I'm making music, and it's very like leftist political music. And essentially, we were performing at like anti-war rallies, right? 2003, the Iraq War is going on,
right.
and very active in that sense.
That's right.
So
and like hip hop and everything, and reading Rumi and Malcolm at the same time is still in your streams.
I was so
it's
far
still in your
outside of the box, like
So 2005 you take the Shahada, but even before then you've been moving in that direction. You said in 2003 you were involved in activism as it pertains to the Iraq War.
Yeah. So when I graduated high school, my parents, well, basically, I'd been making music, so I'd been performing with a group of friends that I grew up with, and we kind of were like well known around Seattle, and it was like
mostly hip hop, or
it was hip hop.
Okay,
and it was like kind of politically leftist, but it was also like spiritual. Like you could see a lot of it was like seeking truth and meaning, what's life about, and this and that. Just that young kid trying to figure it out.
Right.
And but after I graduated high school, I didn't want to go to college. Like I had no interest. I was so like, Islam like brought me more into society. Like I was like so ready to grow my hair out and live in the woods and grow ganja. Like I was like Babylon system, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like we were all on that so hard.
Yeah.
And so like basically what happened is I went to the Rocky Mountains. There's a Buddhist school that was actually founded by Trungpa, who was a Tibetan Buddhist that came here, and then with a group of beat poets and people in those circles, they founded this school. And so I went and studied there for a while, because I was, not that I ever like became Buddhist in the sense, I wasn't interested in like becoming something for identity's sake. I was interested in like, drawing, like fulfilling true human potential. Like we came here to know our true nature. So that's what I was interested in. So I went there for 6 months, and then the group that I was with, our album had dropped, and so around like the Northwest we were getting all these gigs. So I was like, I dropped out and went back to like do music. So, and we were just like performing all around, the city, and it was growing and it was beautiful. And then that's kind of how it happened. So it was like a really interesting time for me, what I mean? There were so many influences, and that's why you see, like, I was deeply spiritually driven,
right,
but also had this leftist thing. So, like, the kind of Buddhism that I was exposed to, a lot of it was kind of like middle class white, but then like the Islam, looking back now, I didn't think of it at the time, but the fact that it had the edge, and it was street, and it was urban, and it was like really like multi-ethnic and all these things, but it also has this depth of the spiritual universe,
right?
And like the straw that broke the camel's back was I read a work on Ibn Arabi, and then I was like, what? Islam has this deep like philosophical metaphysics, like, because I was a bit arrogant about organized religion. That's what I'm trying to get at. And then I saw like, you see what I'm saying?
Right.
Because that's the thing that I think is really important for people to understand now is like in traditional societies, you saw the fruit of religion.
Yeah.
You saw the hujjat al-Islam, right? Like Imam al-Ghazali, the proofs of Islam. Because you saw illuminated people. You saw transformed. You saw saints and sages, people that their presence made you shake. And modern people don't believe in that anymore.
Yeah.
And maybe at most they say once upon a time there was people like that. You see what I'm saying? But I knew, I was reading about people like that, and so, but I never met anyone like that either. And my point here is that, like, when you look at the exterior of religion, Western people, they're looking for experiential knowledge. They want to be transformed. They want to this is my experience.
Yeah.
They want to transcend the ego identity, right? Once you kind of accept that this is a possibility, and this is kind of at the essence of the mystical traditions of every religion.
Yeah.
Then it's like, okay, so kind of you could say, right, reading Ibn Arabi, that's kind of like haqiqah, right? This is like the end goal of the path. We have sharia, the outward, then tariqah, the inward, and then haqiqah is what it all leads to, these esoteric realities. But because I'd never been in the presence of someone who realized the absolute reality like that, like the truths, I needed to understand where it led to dedicate myself to the first stages. Like once I saw, okay, this is the point, now you can show me how to wash myself for prayer. Now you can show me why there should be a structure, why you should step into a room with your right foot and out of a room with your left foot, and all these minutiae, because I understood, it's to stay in constant remembrance so that you can eventually awaken more from the dream, right? Like Inception, a dream within a dream within a dream. So you wake up out of that one, and then boom. You know what I mean?
That's right.
I got it. Like, I could submit to the discipline because I understand there was a goal.
Yeah.
And I think most people, even Muslims, unfortunately, nowadays, they don't really see Islam as like, there's a goal. It's just an identity. It's
because so true.
You see what I'm saying? And that's what we've lost.
Right.
Because
for most of us who are born into the faith and grow up into faith, it's the exact opposite, right? We are introduced to Sharia, as it were, the doctrinal aspects of the faith, the minutiae, as it were, without really seeing the end.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. And many times it's just like parents or teachers or whatever saying, do this, don't ask why.
Right.
So
if you want, this is very doctrinal.
Right. And you're not getting, because like even if why do we pray?
No.
Sometimes people are like, how dare you ask that? You know what I mean?
Of course.
And unfortunately that kind of stifles that spirit that wants to know, that is.
And I think what you're touching on, and we talked about this even with like the episode with Azhar, right? Which is like, if Islam is going to grow and continue to grow, and be what's the word? Not palatable, but absorbed by Western audiences, it has to speak to that reality of people who are searching for the truth, but they want to see kind of where is this all leading. Like, I get the minutia, but why? And you know what I mean? Like, look, I don't want to sign up to organized religion just for the sake of identity politics. For example.
It's confusing, man, because if you go to world religions class at any good university, you see beauty and truth in all these different religions, and you see that, especially if you start to read the mystical literature, you're saying essentially they're all realizing the same thing. This, this oneness, this ego death, where you're experiencing that we're all one ultimately, and the source of being is one, and we're, you know what I mean. So like it can get really confusing because if you're just like, well, what's going on? Like what the plurality we're in. The point is, in a traditional society, you were just everyone was what you were, and then there was people that were righteous, not so righteous, good, not so good. But
largely
now,
homogenous societies where
now like your neighbor's a Sikh, and your neighbor's a Hindu, and your neighbor's a Christian, and a Mormon, and it's confusing. Young people growing up, because it's just like, and so a lot of people just opt out and say, it's just all the same or whatever.
So then for you, what was it? What was that salient feature then that said, if it came down to, okay, I've got option A here, and I don't mean to characterize like this, Buddhism, and you got option B, Islam. Yeah, when I study the mystical elements of it, a lot of it seems the same, but what was that sort of salient feature that said, what, Islam?
That's a really great question. So for me, it was like, on one hand, it was that Islam affirms all that came before. Islam is very universal. I mean, the Quran itself is the scripture that speaks about other traditions more than any other scripture in world religion history, right? So, and it affirms them.
Correct. One of the names of the Quran and the Prophet, I believe, is Musaddiq. Right? That which affirms.
Right. And so every nation was sent a prophet. Yeah. They all came with the same message. Yes, the outward form of that message may have been a little bit different. The Sharia may have been different in different times, but the message was always La ilaha illallah, there is no one but the one.
Putting a name on it, the Aqidah was the same, but, but the creed was
the same. And because I came, I never once, for 1 second of my life, disbelieved in God. And I never, for one moment in my life, disbelieved in the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because I was like, he was one of the enlightened masters too. Right? You know what I mean? That's where I was coming from. Like, it was, of course. And it was clear to me, that Jesus, I love Jesus, and it was clear to me that, like, I didn't really resonate with how I felt he was represented by the Christians that I knew. I didn't feel like they were embodying that, but I was like, but clearly he was onto something,
It strikes me how, when we look at the moments of our existence that bring us to the right now, your father saying, I don't want them to be pointed in one direction, nor do I want them to be told to be dissuaded. And how that brought you to the point where you could say, I love Jesus and I love Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Yeah, I respect my dad a lot as I get older, you know, like that he and it's deep, And I think about that.
And he couldn't have known.
Couldn't have known. And he's always supported me, by the way, in becoming Muslim and all that stuff. And he's like, he's like really cool with it. And so it's like, but back to your point, so I had on my podcast recently, Philip Goldberg, I believe is his name, and he wrote a book called American Veda. And in there he's talking about the influence of Indian spirituality on the West. It's a great book. If you're interested, which I know we all are, on an Eastern religion coming West, what works, what doesn't work, what becomes successful, what takes off, what is emphasized, what's de-emphasized, because it's really good history. But the thing about it that I really love about that book is he has a lot of really deep kind of reflection. So he says, look, religions fulfill these 5 functions, and he gives them the prefix trans. So it's like translation, transmission, transaction. Those are the exoteric, right? And then there's transformation and transcendence. Okay, so the outward 3, right? Translation, it gives you a meaning, how to understand. Transaction, right? The sacred law, right? And transmission, all the traditions, what to memorize, all these stuff. That's very important. And then the inward, right? Transformation, right? Of course, there's just the moral transformation, but then there's also the kind of spiritual transformation, the caterpillar to a butterfly. And then transcendence, this idea of expanding the boundaries of ego identity or dissolving them altogether and experiencing the oneness that is this whole affair. And it's like, here's the thing, and I've talked with other people about this. I was visiting Vinny Ferraro, who I know has spoken here, a beautiful brother, and we're neighbors on the same street in Oakland. But he's, for those that don't know, he's a prominent Buddhist teacher in the West. And he mentioned to me that, think about this, right? Buddhism is so popular in the West. So many people became Buddhists, right? I mean, Buddhist centers everywhere, right? Famous people, all type of people, right? There is literally next to zero interaction between the Buddhists that came, the Asian Buddhists, and the convert Buddhist community. They're totally separate. Right? The Asian Buddhist community, they have like temples, and then the convert, right? They created these meditation centers. There's literally no overlap.
Wow.
And I thought about this deeply because the reason why is because there's different needs for different communities. So if you come from a foreign country and you want to preserve your traditions, your stories, your norms, your culture, your customs, that's totally understandable.
Yeah.
You know, I hate McDonald's. I would never eat McDonald's. The only time I ever kind of like, oh, McDonald's is when I'm in a foreign country in the Arab world and I see McDonald's, I'm like, I'm home, right? It's like I'm the most anti-McDonald's person, but when I'm there, it's like, it reminds me. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
There's something about you just want to
familiarity.
feel
Yeah.
totally, and so I totally understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But those that are the Westerns that are turning east for spirituality, they're rejecting the dogma. They're rejecting the church structure of Judeo-Christianity because it's not fulfilling transcendence and transformation, not because it's not fulfilling the other thing. You see what I'm saying?
Man.
And so you can't serve them by giving them, we'll just substitute those for those.
That's right. Yeah.
And so this is what's... See,
and also lesson...
within Islam, you know, there's a whole bunch of like vibed out Sufis in the Bay Area that have no relation to the Muslim community children of immigrant, that whole thing. There's no interaction, and they're just like I went to the retreat with Kabir Halminsky and the Threshold Society. It was really beautiful. You have people that have been Muslims for 40 years, and they're just. You would walking down the street, Trader Joe's, you never see them, just your average gray-haired white man or woman, and they're just like, they love Allah and they pray 5 times a day and they're doing it, you know what I mean? And but their emphasis is different than if you go to a mosque, they wouldn't feel comfortable because the emphasis is different. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
And so...
Because, you mentioned Kabir Halminsky's community, so, prior to where is he now? He's in Kentucky.
Yeah.
He used to be in Santa Cruz.
Yep.
So I visited the community in Santa Cruz, and I know I'm literally picturing people I met. Like you said, you bump into them in the supermarket, wouldn't fathom that they were Muslim, but deeply committed Muslims.
Exactly.
And that's a very unique and fascinating community.
Right. And so you have that, right? That's the Rumi. And then you have the black Muslim communities all over America that, in many ways are totally separate also. They're in their... and it was interesting because, I was like with these like vibed out OG white, Sufi Muslims for this retreat. And then after that, I went and visited some like elders in the black Muslim community like the next day. And it was interesting because it was like, this is the same thing, even though it's very different.
Okay.
Right? And they're all kind of like, love Allah, and they're mispronouncing their own Arabic names on both sides, you know what I mean? And they're just like, they have their unique thing, but it fits in it has to be that way for their cultural context. Right? And so like someone who comes from a Muslim heritage and comes to this country, they may look at that and be like, this is weird. Like, it's not familiar.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, but of course, now what we're having is with the younger generation, we're having this, like we said, cross-pollinization, where you're having people from all these different backgrounds and really envisioning, okay, what does it mean and what is it going to look like here?
Right. And we're also beginning to see, I know also recently, based on social media, but you also recently spent time with Dr. Omar, past guest of the show. You have also the emergence of people like Dr. Omar, Sheikh Hamza, right here in the Bay Area, but Dr. Omar, you mentioned T.J. Winter, but Dr. Abdul Hakim Murad in UK, but who kind of they embody and they are straddling both sides.
Right, Sherman Jackson,
Zaid,
all these people,
right,
exactly, and they are fully at home in multiple of these kind of worlds that we're talking about.
That's right.
And
so then for the young seeker, to have people like that, where maybe 20 years ago they weren't there, certainly 40 years ago they weren't there, that's going to spell point to a new kind of a trajectory within the American Muslim community.
And I think it speaks to the fact that like we have to be honest about like, there's different demographics. Some people, right, and it's totally fine. Like what they really want is they want a place where they can have the emphasis on the transaction, transmission, and these like outward aspects of tradition. And some people like the only thing that's going to draw them is the transformation and the transcendence. That's it. And so we need to have different people in different centers that speak to these different things. Like some people might look, it's a shame that like the Buddhists that came from Asia, their centers are separate from these kind of like the American centers. But it's not. It's okay. You know what I mean? And even in traditionally Muslim lands, you had different centers and different demographics. You know, you had the Zawiya, or you had the Khanaqah, or the Tekke, or the Madrasa. And
you're absolutely right. I mean, the same people who would argue that would be the same people who would say that the mosque has to be the center of all communal life for Muslims. And that's just not, that hasn't been the case traditionally, historically. Why should that be the case here in America?
Right.
You know? So, yeah, certainly. And I mean, here we are, and we recording a Ta'leef, you know, kind of that, you know, kind of straddling all of that as well. You know, and you mentioned cross-pollination, and I don't want to just tease the audience, but I mean, what also makes kind of this episode unique is that, you know, having Baraka on the show, you do your own podcast. Yeah. And I definitely want to talk about that because, I mean, I as someone who got turned on to it and started listening, you know, it's been a great show to listen to. So why don't you maybe say a little bit about that, and we can come back to some of the other things we've been talking about. How did you come up with the idea? We already said he was inspired by us.
You guys I wanted to say it again.
Oh yeah, you were
can't get too much of a good thing, right?
Sorry, no, yeah. So it's called Path and Present.
Path and Present.
Yeah, check it out, guys. Yeah,
and you know the idea is really like, because I'm a poet, musician, and stuff. I travel all over the world. And I felt like I was having these amazing conversations with different people, teachers, academics, scholars, artists, poets, comedians, activists. And I would always be like, man, I wish I could share this this conversation with people back home. Because, you know, when I would turn on the TV or even on the internet feed, I would see like a lot of negative. And like, I was like, this doesn't represent anything that I know to be Islam. And again, like, I wasn't just for me. Path and Present is more generally about spirituality and seeking truth and meaning in the present, in the modern world. Right. But because of my own path and my own practice, it's gonna like emphasize Islam and particularly like the Sufi perspective within Islam. Right. And so, but I want to have teachers from different traditions, and I'm really interested in like, you know, like people like Buddhist teachers and teachers from India and gurus and like what they're doing and in the Christian tradition and Jewish mysticism and all these type of things. Yeah. And then not just that, but like artists and stuff like that. So really, it's just like I want to amplify the goodness. And I feel like now with these mediums where all you need is a little mic and a little laptop and you can have a conversation in a room and the entire universe can plug in, you know, and
it's extraordinary.
It's really a trip. Yeah. And what I like about, because I started listening to some podcasts, and what I really liked about it is the ones that I would listen to were just super like raw, long form conversations, not edited. Like there wasn't even like a script. It was just like human beings having real conversations, and there happens to be a microphone. Right. And like you in the news where it's so ridiculous, you know, you watch the news and they're like have like three people and they're like, we're going to talk about a very serious issue that people have been fighting over for centuries. Now you have 3 seconds to talk about it. Now you have 3 seconds, and you have 3 seconds. Go. It's like, what are we doing here? Yeah, exactly. Like, things are complex. And, you know, in our kind of like soundbite world, somebody says one thing and it's amplified, and it's like, no, that's not how it works. Because I feel like with social media, you know, a lot of the arguments and debates and oh my god and outrage, it's like if those people were to sit in a room and actually talk it out for an hour, they'd probably find they don't really disagree all that much. Right. You see what I'm saying? But the medium, you know, it makes it so people are talking past each other. So I just wanted to preserve that. And also, like, one of the kind of, I haven't really, like, my own personal intentions with it are to preserve some of the stories of the elders. Correct. You know, like, there's...
That's us, too.
Like, I mean, in so many ways, you're describing the intentionality behind our show.
Like, tonight at Ta'leef, you know, there's an event honoring Daniel Abdulhai Moore, who's one of my mentors, and my new book of poetry is dedicated to him. And he is from Oakland, California, prominent beat poet, you know, friends with Allen Ginsberg and that whole world, but the younger generation. He was published by City Lights, major publisher of beat poetry, when he was 20 years old or something like that. And then he had the Floating Lotus Magic Opera House in Berkeley, very avant-garde theater, playwright, all this stuff. And then, you know, Abdul Qadir al-Sufi came as a deputy of one of the great Moroccan saints, Sheikh Mohammed ibn al-Habib, who we read his poems here all the time at Talib. He came and kind of like exposed them to Islam, and then they went to North Africa and met this like, right, Hujjat al-Islam, this luminous being, one of the greatest saints of the 20th century in North Africa, and just were totally transformed. And then, so he's like fully in this beat poet tradition, but also fully in the Islamic literature tradition. And, you know, in some ways he was just ahead of his time. People couldn't really appreciate what he was doing. And, you know, I see him as like a predecessor, because it's like now I'm able to, essentially I'm doing what he's doing, like in the next generation.
That's
like
right, you are.
combining these things. And now people are ready for it. So I'm able to go all over the world and people love it and see what and appreciate it. But, you know, he was like more slept on in his life. People didn't get it. They were like, it's, what? So...
That's right.
You know, and he passed away a year ago.
Yeah.
Allah have mercy on him. So we're having an event here, and his wife is going to be here, and all the old kind of you know, people from that community.
Yeah.
So these people are passing into the next realm.
They are,
and they're our salaf.
They are.
There are sanad, and we need, you know, there's such beauty in, like we talk about the different traditions in America, counterculture, and these different traditions, you know, from the Walt Whitman's, the Ralph Waldo Emerson's, to the, you know, the Black Elk, to, you know, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali. Like, we need to understand, like, we have a lineage, like we need to honor the great lineage of America. And there's also, you know, there's always been the freaking Donald Trumps and the, you know, those type of people who are on the dark side, or, you know, at least serving the dark side.
On the orange side.
Right, on the orange side. But that's just life. So
that's
we need,
life.
you know, and I think what's beautiful about, you know, like the black Muslims in general, obviously, is that they, because of the nature of white supremacy, the great black heroes throughout history, almost all of them were kind of like freedom fighters by necessity, just to exist, right? So they don't, so like the black Muslim heroes, a lot of them aren't Muslim. It doesn't matter. They're still like righteous people that stood for truth, right? Where Frederick Douglass is, and the Rosa Parks is, and the, you know, you
Martin Luther King,
Martin Luther King, and the Marcus Garveys, and the Huey P. Newtons, and all this, right? And so they're like fully at home and claiming these heroes as Muslims. And then, of course, you have Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, you have a whole list of other people lesser known, right? But outside of that, right, I think as Muslims we need to embrace and study and really understand, like, who was Ralph Waldo Emerson, right? He was called the America's philosopher, and he was reading Hafiz and Saadi, and he was really influenced, and he was like, you know, he was an amazing thinker. And, you know, a lot of the transcendentalists, they were also in a time like 200 years ago, and they were writing against slavery and stuff like that. These are heroes, and it should be our heroes as well, and we're in that lineage. So we're these barzakh beings. We're in between the liminal space, and we have to, like, you know, that's what we get from the people like Dr. Omar Sherman Jackson, those people that are consciously thinking about these type of topics, is like, we have to be intentional in, like, what is our heritage, and what do we stand for, and what lineage are we in. That's
right. I mean, certainly you've identified the macro. I mean, in the micro sense, the limited capacity that we have, and what we try to do is to, like Baraka's been talking about, is like preserve their stories. And to do to the best of our ability, because they are passing. I mean, you know, of that same generation are people like Hakeem Archuleta, for example. You know, someone who we've been trying to get on the show. We will, inshallah. And then, you know, we recently had Dr. Hassan Bagby. And there's just these giants. And we stand on the shoulders of giants. And so we have to acknowledge.
Well, and one thing that we've said a few times is the idea of illuminating this tapestry of American Muslim, of the American Muslim experience, and how far back it goes, and how it stretches in all these different directions. You know, I mean, Dr. Bagby, who we just talked to last week, so it's very fresh in my memory. But I mean, you know, he has this very unique experience that's emblematic of what, I mean, he came to Islam in, what, 69?
69.
So, I mean, what it was like at that moment in time.
Right.
At that
but also,
juncture.
like, to your tapestry point, you know, he talks about converting to Islam as a biracial person.
Right. Exactly.
And then we've had Osama on the show, Osama Cannon, and we've had Mustafa Davis on the show, and then so we are weaving this tapestry.
Yeah.
And for example, Ahmed Baraka just mentioned,
Well,
Vinny.
the only thing I would push back, we're not weaving the tapestry. It's already there.
No, it's already there. That's
we're
right.
just kind of hopefully pointing it out to people.
You're right. But you mentioned Vinny Ferrara. It's like we've had Mike on the show, Mike Anderson. We've had Osama on the show. It's just like, so we've almost, without even name dropping Vinny, talked about people who've been inspired by him. And so it's just this beautiful. I mean, yeah, like you said, we're just kind of doing our best to just highlight these people.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful medium, man. It's a beautiful, to talk back at the beginning, we talked about griots, right? I mean, and I listened to both podcasts with Azhar Usman of yours. I really liked it. The first one, he just like went, bro. He went deep. He was like the Melakut, the Jabarut, Hahut. Like I was like, mashallah. And shout out to Azhar. And it's like, but he said something in the most recent one that I really liked, and it really hit me. He said something about comedians in American society being the new theologians or philosophers. Yeah. And I was like, whoa, because I've always thought about this as like, I said artists in general, more generally, but comedians, and that's an amazing art form. Right. Because first of all, okay, spoken word poet, it's just you and a mic in the crowd. Same as a comedian. Yeah. But like, if you do a poet, people can be, oh, I kind of like that. Okay, whatever, and that's fine. It's you get on with your show. But if you tell a joke and it bombs, right? Like, there's no medium. There's no like middle. There's just you lost. Yeah.
That's true.
But anyway, like I see like the artists in general. Because we talk about most Americans. They've never met like an enlightened master. They may not even believe in that, right? Secular society. So who fulfills that role? Yeah. And the last kind of people who are seen as kind of magical or mystical, or the ability to bring something amazing from the unseen and be the vessel of some creative power, are the artists. That's right. And see how artists are worshipped in our society.
That's so true.
Right, musicians and people. Yeah. And I think it's there. And often this is a problem because it's like, look. It's like if true artists know that anything good or beautiful that comes to them, it's a gift, right? And if you start to believe your own hype, right, then you can kind of be destroyed by it. And a lot of artists meet very difficult ends. I think it's too much to bear because they're being like, you're this great saint, and it's like, well, maybe I am, and you start to believe it. And without
Elvis Presley dealt with that near the end of his life. If you believe he died or whatever, right. Not so walking around Memphis somewhere. But
he's out with Tupac.
That's right. There you go.
They're cutting a new record.
But the lure of the audience, and not having that anymore near the end of his life was something he really grappled with. But
trip out because I was talking to Brother Ali. Shout out to Brother Ali.
Oh, absolutely.
And he mentioned he went to the Kanye West show, and this was right before Kanye kind of went AWOL and like on stage and kind of like
right.
And Ali said something amazing. He said, it was the weirdest show because it was so between artistic genius and like straight idolatry and ego worship. Because like the show, first of all, like like everyone's on the ground, like it's full, and there's a stage elevated above. And like there's all these speakers on the ground. It's like reverberating the whole crowd, right? And like this is like it reverberates and then it stops for like 2 hours, just building people up. Like when's he gonna come? When's he gonna come? Right? And so it's just like
this is before he's even out.
Before he even so then he comes and he's suspended above them on a stage that moves. So he's just out of arm's reach and they're all reaching for him. And he doesn't interact with the crowd at all. He doesn't acknowledge that they're there. He just performs his song. And the stage like turns at angles and he's harnessed to the stage, so he's like hanging off. Yeah. And he said it was like so avant-garde, like artistically brilliant, but it was so nefsi. It was so like I am this deity, right? Yeah. And like Yeezy and like this whole idea. Yeezus. But and he was like, but and then he hit me when we were talking. I said, remind me of this line that Rumi has. He said, Bayezid, Bastami, and the Pharaoh. Okay, Pharaoh said, Ana Rabbukum, like I am your Rabb, I am your Lord, Most High, right? Which is, and this was his ultimately his fall from grace
Yeah,
because he associated himself with the divine.
Mm-hmm.
But people like Hallaj and Bayezid Bistami, they said things like Ana al-Haq, I am the ultimate reality.
Mm-hmm.
So they were saying the same thing outwardly, but Rumi says something interesting.
Yeah.
He says, but when Pharaoh said it, he was saying it from himself. And when Hallaj and Bayezid said it, they were saying it from the absence of self.
Right.
They were, and so this is the difference. They weren't calling to themselves. Where you see, that's where it gets dark, when you're calling to yourself. But when you're just a vessel that is calling to something beyond yourself, i.e., the divine, then that's true artistry. Because then it's like, if people praise you, you don't see yourself. If people say you're amazing, you don't see it as you. You say this was a gift, because true artists know, like, you can't write your greatest poem or your greatest joke or your greatest song or your greatest novel whenever you want.
Right.
And that's why people that believe their own hype, they have that first hit, and then they're like, oh my God, how am I going to come up with another one? Right? It becomes too much. You see what I'm saying? Pressure.
Yeah.
Because they think it's from them. But, I think, and that's why, just to wrap, kind of, the point that I think is also important is, like, the spiritual path should unleash creativity. I mean, look when Islam went to the lands, it made these great poets in every language immediately.
Right.
Like, what is that?
Right.
And now, not a lot of people, Muslims and non-Muslims, don't associate Islam with creativity. That's actually, right. And so then, I guess we have to ask, like, are we really practicing the tradition properly? Because it should be unleashing creativity, as opposed to stifling it.
As Dr. Jackson likes to put it, like, unleash our creative genius. Yeah, absolutely.
So we want to have you read a selection from your book, but actually before you do that, we received a letter at our email address, diffusedcongruence@gmail.com, and I wanted to share it kind of with the panel here, because I think this is somebody who's asking some questions that could benefit from both of your. So this is from Chad, and he says, Zaki already knows me as Chad on Facebook, but I wanted to address both of you in no small part because I've listened to quite a few of your episodes, especially the ones involving converts coming from a Christian cultural background. So this isn't something I've been open about on social media, but maybe it won't be much of a surprise to Zaki if he's paid attention to the people I know on Facebook, but I've been interested in Islam as a path for myself for several years now, to the point you might say I, quote, semi-converted for a while, by which I mean I would attend the prayers regularly and read the Quran in English, though. But I recently had to move from a diverse college town to a pretty conservative and uncosmopolitan area. There's an Islamic community in the area, and I will try to reach out to them, but part of my struggle is being a pretty socially progressive person, and frankly it's been a bit difficult feeling comfortable with Islamic communities outside digital space because of it, even though I see no contradiction between my understanding of Islam and my political and social values. But beyond Islam, feeling comfortable with religious communities in general has always been a serious issue with me. Anyway, my point finally is I was wondering if you all could point me toward any resources for someone in my situation. Writings, blogs, folks you've interviewed in the past for me to contact, whatever, etc. It's been hard to get past my second guessing and fear that I'm just going through some delayed white kid rebellion. But I will say the beauty of the act of worship has drawn me in, and the simplicity of Islam itself appeals to me in a way the excluding and convoluted metaphysics of Christianity never really did. Thank you, and I hope this wasn't too awkward. Chad.
Wow.
What's up, Chad? That was dope, man. Thank you, brother.
Any thoughts? No, I would defer to you.
Yeah. I've thought about this. It's like, Islam is two things. I mean, one is it's your individual soul's relationship with your Creator. And at the end of the day, we all stand in the divine presence on the day of rising, and we're held accountable for each breath and each moment and each action and word and deed. And so it's intensely personal and intimate. On the other hand, so much of the deen is communal.
Yeah.
And we do things together. We're encouraged to pray together. We fast together, right? There's certain things that zakat is like you need to be part of. Hajj, right? Like all these, the basics. And, I think in our time, a lot of times community is lost and community is fractured. And there's a whole lot of history about that. But we really need to emphasize embodying sacred community, which is really filled with love and really filled with that maxim of Rumi, come whoever you are. You know, wanderer, lover of leaving, even if you've broken your vows 1,000 times.
That's
ours
right.
is not the caravan of despair. And this is the caravan of love and hope. And anyone who is, truly, really walking the path of La ilaha illallah is a person of positivity and hope, because it feels you like this whole affair is beautiful, and it's painful and tragic too, but in the end it's beautiful. Like the whole affair is, but it can also often be lacking, because sometimes you go to your Muslim space and you don't find the come whoever you are, right? That's not the feeling.
It's definitely not the vibe. Yeah.
And so I feel for you. I feel you.
Yeah.
I feel you, and I'm grateful that I did early on find communities and brotherhood and teachers and elders. Many of the people you've had on your show, from Dr. Omar and people like Usama and what he's done with Ta'leef, and people in the artist community especially as well. In a time where people are like, music's haram, bid'ah, kufr, shirk, all that stuff, and I find all these like young Muslim artists and musicians, and I'm like, whoa. Like we're in the studio, and I'm used to in the studio people are like smoking blunts and drinking 40 ounces, and they're like in the studio, burning oud and making sujood, and I'm like, yes, this is what I you know what I mean?
Wow. So there's an emergence of a culture.
Exactly. And so it's out there, and it's not everywhere, but may we be those people, may we be connected to those people. But inshallah, these podcasts can be, I've listened to podcasts where, I just get exposed to different people that are on there, and then that leads down another rabbit hole, and their books or their music or their comedy or whatever, and I'm like, it just takes me on this thing where I just got exposed to a whole new universe of people. And that's at the best. That's what these tools can be. So
that's right. Kind of like a virtual community. And I mean, I would also tell Chad. I mean, well, one, thank you for listening for sure, and we hope that the guests that we've been able to bring on the show have been meaningful in the sense that people that you have listened to and benefited from. I would also kind of echo what Baraka just said in terms of even if you were to live in a place that did have community, let's say by numbers. Who's to say whether that would be a community that would be that prophetic community, which would be a community of love and welcome and come as you are, and so you don't know.
Where would you point him?
I mean, shameless plug. I mean, I would say definitely go to Ta'leef Collective. Yeah, I would say go to Ta'leefCollective.org. A lot of our communal, like a lot of the things that we do here, whether it's in the Bay Area or in Chicago. We live stream it. We broadcast it. You can check out the broadcast. You can engage. I can facilitate a conversation you can have with Osama Cannon, founding director, people like Baraka and others who were able to bring to
there's really cool retreats here.
Yeah, cool retreats. We do an annual newcomers retreat. We offer all kinds of classes and things like that as well for people, whether you're Muslim or just interested in Islam. So. Absolutely. Do reach out, and you can also ping me here at the show, and I'd be happy to connect you with anybody I can.
Well, with that in mind, as we do wind towards our conclusion,
that's right.
I was hoping, Baraka, that you could share a selection from your writing with the audience.
Bismillah.
So tell us a little bit about the book, if you could.
So this book is...
this is the book that is dedicated to the late Abdul Hayy Moore.
It's called Empty in the Ocean, and it's...
Empty in the Ocean?
And the Ocean. Empty in the Ocean.
Yeah.
And it's just a few months old, actually, so...
and people can buy this...
Yeah, if you go to my Facebook, Baraka Blue Facebook, you'll find the link there.
Great. And we'll put the link up when we post the show as well.
For sure. Yeah.
And if I could also, where can people find your fine podcast?
Yes, the podcast is called Path and Present, and it is on iTunes, and it's on SoundCloud. Those are the two places. Yes, you should find it there, and I think you may enjoy some of them. I don't know, what kind of vibe are you guys going for?
We'll let you steer the ship into port. So.
I think this kind of fits with what we've been talking about today. It's called Things That Can't Be Taught. And the idea behind this poem is that as you get older, you know, you kind of probably came through. I was always kind of a rebel. I think that's just part of me. So a lot of times when my parents or elders said, don't do this, but I usually did it. And then I usually learned, oh, they were right. I shouldn't have done that. But I had to learn for myself, right? Don't touch the pot. Oh yeah, it is hot. It is hot. And there's certain things about experiential knowledge. Sometimes it's really beautiful. You know, I heard one of the elders say who used to be a heroin addict, and he said, a religious person is somebody who doesn't want to go to hell. A spiritual person is someone who's been to hell and doesn't want to go back. And you know, he was speaking from someone who's been to hell.
Yeah, that's right.
And you know, this idea of, in our tradition, especially in the poetry, you know, the mystics always talk about how can you explain honey to one who's never tasted. And it's this idea that if all of us together tried to explain what honey tasted to someone who had never tasted honey, we would never sucdeed in a million years. Right? There's certain things that have to be tasted, experienced. So,
what we in the spiritual tradition call lok.
That's it.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's things that can't be taught. Things that can't be taught, like poetry and rhythm and moon sadness and sun dance on grass leaves dew, gratitude and death. I like what can't be taught but must be learned by anyone serious about living and serious about dying. Things which can't be chalked on boards or scribbled in notebooks, but must be tucked beneath forms into back behind heart pockets by whoever does that anymore, and always has. Everything dancing around the center. Ablaze flames grotesque and sometimes subtle, sometimes too much to gaze upon, sometimes silent, sometimes siren song, taunting the living out of their life. Everyone dancing around the subject. No one says it. Everyone knows that no one knows it. No one knows that everyone knows it. You can't be taught to burn. There is a single way to learn. The way that's always been only open. You can't be taught to smell the ocean. You must go yourself to the edge. What can't be taught but must be learned to die well. I live to know what can't be taught. Style and grace, to feel, to be silent, or rather, what silence means. You can't be taught to realize. You can't be taught to realize. Compassion can't be taught. You can be taught the motions, but sincerity cannot be bought. By a private education or through a taxpayer stipended underpaid government employee. What I learned in trap houses and mud huts can't be taught. In masjids and mushrooms can't be taught. What can't be taught to sailors, to be amongst the waves, must be learned in silence, amidst the cold and early graves. What can't be taught is wisdom. What can't be taught is pain. Certainty certainly can't be taught, if doubt would still remain. I can't be taught to love you. I can't be taught to cry. And I can't be taught to stay here if I was born to die.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think if there's any doubt about artists being our new theologians, put that to rest today. I mean, because you're talking about and grappling with things. I think that even our greatest theologians sort of, discussed, and whether it was the Maturidis against the Mu'tazila or whatever, in terms of how do we know things. the nature of goodness and the nature of evil, and these were things that
experience and consciousness and awareness.
Yeah, that's right. So,
and I would say too, just in closing, that one quote that I really love, Sayyidu Sayyid Nasr said, "Art is the means by which the deepest truths of a religion are articulated to the masses."
Yeah.
Wow.
Because very few people are going to read high-level works of theology or fiqh or philosophy or metaphysics, but in a traditional society, the poems and the song and in some cases the dance and the architecture and even the clothing and the calligraphy and all these things allow us to actually experience those deep realities.
Yeah.
And I think, we really need to emphasize and support the arts in that way, because we have many great conferences where it's like 100 speakers, and they may be great.
Yeah.
But then you have like one entertainer.
That's right.
But it's like, but what are we missing about human psychology?
Yeah.
What is it about humans that is really moved and transformed and inspired?
Right.
It's the, what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but you guys are doing a great service, man. You guys are amplifying really beautiful conversations. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And myself.
Thank you so much for coming on, and hopefully we'll get to have you back on. It's open door policy.
Yeah, and before we let him go, though, where can people find you online and find out more about you?
barakablue.com is my website.
Okay.
And that should link you to all my social media, etc.
Or if you're visiting a city nearby or something.
Yeah. And I travel quite
dates.
a bit.
Yeah.
I'm on my way to Southeast Asia in a few days. So, but I travel a lot. So hopefully I'll be in a city near you. Yeah.
Nice. Well, and as far as our show, you can find us at diffusedcongruence@gmail.com if you want to email us. And thank you again, Chad, for sending us that message. And with that, on behalf of my co-host Parvez Ahmed and our guest Baraka Blue, my name is Zaki Hasan. This has been Diffused Congruence. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening.
Mm-hmm.